This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Welcome to the penultimate episode of Demystifying Mental Toughness for 2021, where I'm fortunate to be joined today by a well-esteemed guest in Gary Curneen, a football or soccer coach, an author and a coach educator who shares with me some great nuggets of advice for coaches involved in a range of sports. Before I do go on to introduce what we talk about, as this episode is released on Christmas Eve, I just want to say how grateful I am to each and every one of you who listens to the show for your kind words and for your feedback. It really helps shape the podcast and future episodes and the content that we produce. I sincerely hope that you have a happy and a safe Christmas and enjoy the festivities. Now, in relation to this episode, Gary and I go on to chat about his experiences as a football or soccer coach and how important the psychological side of the game is, as well as how effective it is used. We chat about the role of video analysis and sports science in producing confident footballers, how you communicate and what and when you say it as a coach were also things that we discussed. I really hope that you enjoy this episode wherever you're listening from. So Gary, from your book, you mentioned the ultimate goal of training is to prepare athletes to perform at their best in important competitions. So how important, do you think the psychological part is actually integrated from coaches and specialists? How effective is it?
Wow, two questions there. Like, how important is it? Very. How effective is our teaching? Probably not very, as we're getting more and more kind of information, or we're, I suppose, from my perspective, learning either what doesn't work or learning where the holes are and questioning. And I think as you move up the ladder in coaching, you almost do realize that either traditional practices were flawed or habits, processes that you've had in place, and maybe you have tested them and road tested certain, frameworks, and then you're questioning, second guessing them, and that's, I do that a lot. And I think to the first one, how important, I do think that the psychological does underpin every say. Like I wrote a book on the four dimensional, which is similar to the four corners of development. With I would say at the senior level, the difference is that the tactical is a corner by itself, because the game is so tactical, physical, and then the mental, I would probably put mental, emotional / so it's but that would be me not being an expert in your field. As I'm going down that, I would have had that as basically a square with four corners. And now in my life, where I'm looking at the game, it's almost becoming a circle, and it's almost becoming a mesh where the psyche is so important. Like, and working with senior players, where my learning has been in the last couple of years, where you're working with players that have higher ranges of skill, higher ranges of physical abilities, and more commitment, better focus, blah blah blah. But it almost rises and falls by the mental, psychological side of the game, and I think that's where we are as coaches now, where I think we've gone backwards. I hope that we're going backwards to go forwards, but I think we've gone backwards, and maybe we've compartmentalized the teaching of it. We've gone a bit to, the tactical side of it, and the sports science side of it, but it doesn't matter if the player can run X amount in X distance at X time, if the player's not motivated or interested or engaged in doing it. And I think that's where we're currently looking at maximizing every moment we have with our players. And if they're in this society, especially if they're not there mentally and emotionally, you have no chance of maximizing that time. So I think it's a really interesting era for coaches, because I think there's more pressure, B, more distractions, and C, more information, and how we decipher around how we operate in that there. I think it takes a great deal of I think it takes a great deal of humility to understand that, like, player A is different from B, the motivations that, and just understanding that probably a lot of what you're going to do here is going to fall on deaf ears. You're going to have to keep going and keep, and catch yourself getting wrong in the same way you do in a match. You might lose on a Saturday and you go again, and maybe you have to do that with players these days.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I must admit I'm in agreement with you. But obviously, I'm a bit biased where I would have the psychology bit in a ring in the middle, and then on the outside, the technical, tactical definitely is a separate psychological, physical, and social come lifestyle. Because really, I mean, if you think about it, it does start in the mind, doesn't it? Whether a player decides they want to listen to the coach and carry out instructions, or whether they want to put in the extra yards in their training. So yeah, I mean, that's my thought on it. Just take it back though to, you mentioned about the sports science side, and obviously numbers, stats are a big part of the game there now. What are your experiences in terms of the way they're used in actually helping a player perform better in terms of building their confidence up?
Yeah, I've gone. I could do I could go on a rant here. I've gone way. I've started being probably about 2 years ago. My experiences with the science were more. I felt it was more detrimental, and I felt that it capped performance in terms of the fact that I felt that the numbers that were given to coaches were, in terms of training load, that were just generic numbers. That you need to have someone that if team A trains with a training load in team B, and they do a 5v5 exercise, that 5v5 exercise is going to look different in any culture. There's intensity, there's actions, there's driving from the coaches, there's quality. And I think now, again, as we get more information, then we should be better equipped. And I think, again, the level of humility to be like, this is a funny story. I bought a set of heart rate monitors in 2014 when I was a college coach, with the specific goal of using that information to tell player X that they weren't working hard enough in a training session. And this thing cost like $3,000 to $4,000 from my budget. And I couldn't wait to, hook it up and do all this. And did it, brought the player in, at the graph and all this here, and this is you compared to players B, and player B works really hard, and look, you can see here that you haven't worked really hard. And she was, I always remember, like, she was like, that one, you could tell that it didn't really, it didn't make an impact. And B, when we started talking about why it didn't make an impact, well, she would then have, but I was playing in this position, and what about this other player who doesn't work as hard and they play? And I think with players, it's, as coaches, what I learned was that you can have this, you kind of have this dialogue with yourself of like, everyone can see what I'm thinking. And then you actually get evidence to back that up, but you can still miss. And that's what I want. And I realized, like, once I realized after that meeting, the things were done. Like, I'd wasted $4,000 of the school's money on machines. So after that, I was in a bad spot with that, because they got put me in a negative with science. But I worked with someone in my recent role here, and she was so good on, well, what are we trying to get out of it? Spaces, sizes, these numbers can help lead us to what we're trying to get out of it. And it wasn't that the numbers were the objective. It was the numbers were part of the process, in the same way that there was a tactical objective, there was a physical objective, and in the same way is there too much information in the pre-game, in the pre-training meeting? Well, is there too much load? And just had a really, really, I would say, holistic way of implementing it in a soccer culture. And again, going back to the compartmentalization, I think that's part of, I think as a coach today, like, do you have to be science savvy? Do you have to be psych savvy? And I don't think you have to be an expert, but I do think that you have to know where they all, I think you have to have not even a basic, I think you have to have a decent understanding of what you know and what you don't know. So then when you bring in that expert can collaborate with you alongside S&C alongside maybe it's psych, maybe it's technical. Or everyone because everyone eventually wants more time with the players. But I think then in an elite environment, it's all aligned and cohesive. So that's where I think that science has a massive, massive role. I would say that, and I've done podcasts with like Tony Strudwick. I think has been really good in this area about how sports science has almost limited our minds. And I think the great thing about the game today is that I had Jim McGuinness on, who had worked with Roger Schmidt at Beijing, and he's saying, well, the great coaches today are just, they're not even, like Brad Friedel said, they're not even working off a number. They're just creating their own, pushing. And I think that's what soccer should be in every area. Like it should tactically, we should be pushing to an extent, and psych ways we should be looking at improving, and fitness ways we should be doing the same. So I do think there's a real need for it, but I think, skilled on both sides, probably skilled in the practitioner in terms of delivering, and then also skilled in the facilitator of head coach, assistant coach environment of getting the most out of everyone.
Yeah, I'm going to take you back. There's a couple of things you said there. I think humility you mentioned there, and obviously knowing the individual. You talked about the position from your experience of wasting 3,000 or 4,000 being a problem. So yeah, I think, and obviously time can be a difficult thing, can't it, for a coach when you've got a squad of 20, 25 players. Yeah, where am I going with this? So yeah, knowing the individual is so important in that respect. And that, again, yeah, there's a place for numbers, but I suppose some players, again, will buy into it more and some won't. So what are your thoughts on the player who maybe doesn't buy into the numbers? How do you then manage that type of situation?
Again, like I would say I've changed a lot, and I'd say humility has been like, not that I have humility, is that I've been humbled by the process of, I would say, maybe it's age, maybe it's just my life, but I'd say 5-10 years ago, the coach in me would be quite dismissive of the player, and I would say I felt that I was quite player driven and player led and all these cool terms when I was college coach, but I actually wasn't. Like I was really coach led. It was quite a top down in terms of like what was said was implemented, and maybe that's the space of college that you have to do that in terms of like short space, and you have to get everyone together in a short time. But I felt that was to the detriment of like education and development. And here now at the senior level, where I would say my role as an assistant coach would be more with individuals as well, and trying to follow in. And I do a lot of video, and for some of them, I realize after about a month or 3 or 4 meetings that maybe it's too much information. Maybe they're getting worse. Maybe I'm making them worse in terms of like, oh, think about this and do this. So I think you have to see people in a positive, and that's where I would say the foundation of like, whereas college Gary saw people like probably in the negative first, because they're like, oh, you got to align. Whereas I now see the better, like everyone wants to get better in my eyes, but it's up to me now to like fill the space of performance and potential. And for some of them, I'm a little bit more aware now of where like maybe I'll dip in and out, and maybe it's a little, and I'll try to, maybe it's a little meeting, maybe it's a coffee, maybe it's a comment on the training pitch, and I'll try and gauge whether they're ready for a little bit more. And more intuition. Whereas again, like going down the route of structure and science, it's almost that it's just, you think of spreadsheets and you think that people are, yes, like a player development spreadsheets, and I've done them, and I've written a book on like different player profiles and wheels, and they look great and it's brilliant. But at the end of the day, like the player can change overnight. And I'd always remember in Chicago, at a player she came in to do a meeting. It was the day after the game, because I brought in someone that wanted to do a little bit of research on decision making, Eileen Gleason, and she came in the door, and she was doing me a favor by meeting with Eileen, so it was great. Like, and she was going out of her way to kind of get up and get to the stadium. But she didn't have a great game, and it wasn't going well for her. And you could just tell by her face that it was just, hey. I just looked at her straight. She says, hey. I said, how you doing? And she says, can we do this tomorrow? And I was like, I needed her to do it today, but I knew that she needed, and I thought that was actually like, I actually patted myself on the back for that, because 5 years ago I'd have said to the young kid, you got to do it. I need you to do it. And it would have been to the detriment of performance. And like today, I think as coaches, and again, maybe it's just my perception, but I think that you have to constantly, you have to see the best in people, which is hard because it's it is a tough environment, and sports brings out the best and worst in people. So there is always tension and all that there. And it is almost getting more of an individual sport, even though we're in a team context. So you have to just keep chipping away. And then again, like, I think the humility of when you get it wrong, and I get it, I've got it wrong almost. I've tried to be a bit better with my language in terms of not being as definitive and not being as authoritative in terms of like, this was wrong, and change it. Be like, this is, hey, when you did this, I thought this. And just to give them a bit more to be like, I'm not coming from this angle. I'm coming from an observation angle, and take it how you want to take it initially. And if you like that type of information, then maybe we give more of that information. But it's hard in terms of like, it's a long slog. So it's enjoyable because it's like people to people, and you're talking about the game. But when you're trying to get to reap the rewards of these types of conversation, it's always a long game, isn't it?
Yeah, to say the least. Like you say, you're going to sleep well on a night time as well because of it, because if you're going to put your heart and soul into it. One thing that stood out as well, again, you talked about the sports science and comparing players. I suppose, what would your message be for coaches in terms of the way they communicate, be it to do with the numbers, or just be it in general on the training pitch, where they're comparing one player against another and trying to motivate them in that way?
Yeah, this is a good talk. Like, I had an argument with a coach about this, a good argument a couple of months ago, that I would say not to compare, and this other coach was saying that I would say they all, like, Michael Beale has a really good piece on it where it's you versus yourself. And I really like that, because I felt that was me when I was playing. Like, I didn't need to, and it's even me now, like, I don't need to go against that other person or to motivate. Like, I like trying to get becoming better and buying into that. And I think it's healthy. And Michael Beale always says something along the lines of don't look across to compare, look across to compete, or something like that there. But the other coach that I was working with was like, no, that's only the top end people can do that. Everyone else has to compete, because you have to knock someone out of a spot, or you have to beat someone. So yeah, I still stick. I was like, it was a great conversation, but I still stick to like what I believe. I think in terms of like facilitating the information to the player. Yeah, like I think, especially with younger players, I think it's got to be about, let's talk about you, and let's talk about where you're at, and almost like, again, that humility piece. And maybe it's almost trying to facilitate some humility in the player. And there's great piece on the class of '92, I think, with Sir Alex, where they're all sitting in their reunion and they're all laughing over a glass of wine, and they're all comparing stories about how he dropped them. And like, one of them, the pitch was too heavy. The other one couldn't play against Liverpool, whatever player it was. But I always thought that was genius, because you're actually, you're communicating to the player, but you're also telling them where the little holes are in their game. Yeah, you can't play on a tough pitch, where you're saying then that they're physically, you can't play against Liverpool, you're technically not good enough, all these things. And I just think that, I think when you're communicating to players, to your question there, David, when you're communicating to players, I think video is gold these days. I think video is gold. I think if you're consistent with video, you've got a real chance of connecting to the player, because it's a buffer. I think as coaches, sometimes we see the game, we literally see the game east to west, and a player plays the game sometimes north to south, and sometimes it visually looks two different ways. So if you're describing the game to the player and listen, I saw you do this and you did this and turned there, that player could be like, they could not remember what that is. So because of not only the situation, but also like emotion could have been going through, they could just have a gap in their memory of that. So I think in a video, it allows you to actually like take away this pressure of me giving you feedback face to face, hard feedback. Like for a young player, that's difficult, socially difficult. So if you have a screen in the middle and you're both looking at it and you're saying, this is what I see here, can you give me your take on it? And I could be wrong here, but it looks like you've been reluctant to go press because of this situation. And the player can then feel like, oh no, like maybe they can disagree with you. And when they disagree with you, maybe you just put a little bit more gas on that and say, all right, no, this is really good. And if you can get them to disagree with you on performance, I think then you can open a dialogue where it's, the psychological safety. And I think that's way easier than, like, for me, and again, all coaches are different, but for me, numbers, like I have struck out on numbers in terms of science, and I've found data difficult as well. Like it's been easier, but like say KPIs and this is what you're trying to do, and this is a performance wheel and all that. Like the player sees it, but they just don't have the grasp of what a coach sees. But the video I think is a great little medium for both of us to connect on. So that's why, like today, I spend a lot of time doing video, but I spend a lot of time animating video and highlighting it and people probably think that it's all for show. But for me, it's to actually make the content better. Because if they're looking at their phones on Instagram every day, like they're looking at good visuals. Mm-hmm. So if I've got them and I've got them for 2 minutes, like I want them to look at their performance as if they're on Sky Sports. So I have to make sure that, that's why I invest in it. That's why I invest time and finances in making sure that the visuals are good. And if it's a chance to, again, my success rate is probably lower than I would want, but I feel that I'm confident going into that meeting that it's got me an opportunity to try and connect.
Right, you've opened a minefield now then. I liked some of the comments you came up with. But when it comes down to the video, would you be more inclined, again, when we're going back to the whole thing about comparing players, would you compare them in different situations as opposed to comparing them with with one of their teammates and what they've done in a certain situation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, yeah, I wouldn't compare on video. And again, just with my philosophy, and it's maybe reading I have gone in and said, listen, this is player X, and I think you've got even a famous player, let's say Chicharito, and it's a forward, and you're looking at getting in a 6-yard box, and it's so I would show, right, there's your goals, and there's Chicharito's goals, and I think you've got this, and it I spend a lot of time doing it, and it falls on deaf ears, and you're like, it didn't land. But when you're talking about what I try to do is like I say, like, thinking about it, I would probably do 2 different ways. I would say, right, well, the objective, like the solid concrete answers is probably in terms of intensity, where it's like you've got to get from A to B. And it is subjective to an extent, but we probably are going to agree that is that your maximum effort closing down that ball? Is that your maximum effort transitioning? And players will typically be pretty honest with you and say like, 90% or 70%, but yeah, there's a bit more. All right, well, that's definitive. Like we've got to work at our maximum defensively and in transitions, blah, blah, blah. But I'd say then with where I've changed as a coach over the last couple of years has been when it's decision making. It's more here's what you could do, and I think that's where I'm kind of confident, and that's why I've improved as a coach. It's where I allow the player to like talk me through it. I think the better the relationship with the player, the more they're going to say, yeah, they're going to start taking a little bit more. Like I've got a player that I would meet with quite often that says that it almost drives the decision. I put the clip on, I do a bit of animations, you freeze it, and they put things in my head that I didn't see. And I'm then looking and saying like, oh, yeah, it's a great point, but I don't know if you can do that. But then thinking, oh, now you're challenging me. Now you're saying that a right back shouldn't just play that ball. A right back or left back should be doing that there. So I think allowing the player a bit of space, but then also then having, maybe it's different for a forward. I'm thinking now as I talk technically, I'm not a big fan of technically critiquing, because I don't believe technique is like set in stone. Like I do believe that there's an output. Like a forward should have to build up play, should be allowed to combine. But who's to say that a toe poke is less effective than an instep and all this here? So that's where I am as a coach. I'm really loose around technique, because I don't think there is a set technique that works for every situation.
Yeah, I suppose if there was a set technique, then you would lose the Messis and people like that, wouldn't you? The players that can just play off the cuff, which sort of takes us over to perfectionism. I noticed in your book you've got a chapter called Effectiveness over Perfectionism. But I just wondered, just while we're on the topic of video analysis, can that drive perfectionism, do you think?
Yeah, like I think you would hope so, wouldn't you? Like I think the goal is ultimately, like we all want strive to perfection. Where I would say is like, and I've probably again changed in recent years, like what is perfection? Is perfection 10 out of 10, or is perfection our best chance? So is our best chance to get the most out of someone? Like if someone has maybe a lesser skill set that is performing at an unbelievable rate, like that's as close to your perfect. That's not messy, but it's as close to that player's perfection as you're going to get. And that's probably, I would say that's my type of goal at the minute. The effectiveness over perfection is like, again, similar to Michael Beale. Like it's something that resonated with me, because as a player, that was me. Like I wasn't as output driven, and as a coach, I try not to, and I think today with more, we said before we start recording, more noise, more pressure, playing time is becoming more and more, even at senior level, playing time is becoming more of a dynamic. I think in America, we talk about wins and losses. Like we talk about, we have such a great culture, I suppose, of competitiveness. But I think sometimes competitiveness can actually mislead you into like the joy of playing. Like, and that's not just the players I've worked with. It's the players that I've worked with that at the senior level that are just at different level, that are world class at what they do. I think they have such a love of the game. And that's something that I've tried to then reverse engineer and be like, well, where's that come from? And sometimes I look at players and not just here, but everywhere, and sometimes you go to an environment and it might be beautiful. It might be the most pristine pitch and these equipment, and it's a great session layout, and the players just aren't interested. And it might be 16 years of age and elite level. And you're like, it's got to be more to it than this. So then I would say, right, well, was that because of this culture of you win? So I would say that's more of like perfection over the score rather than perfection in development. And you're never going to reach perfection in development, but perfection in the score, I just like, what is it? Like winning a game or winning a championship? I just think there needs to be more than that.
Yeah, it's such a big topic. I suppose we could have talked about this for the whole podcast, really. And one thing I notice when I'm working with players, whether it's top level down to kids, where I might ask them the question, say to a forward, how many, if you have 10 shots, how many times do you expect to hit the target? And the amount of times, because of this drive for perfection, they'll come up with 8-9 times out of 10. But then, you look at the figures, the stats, the Salahs, the Kanes, they'll hit it 40, 40%, 50% sort of thing. So they're missing 5 out of 10. It's a tricky one.
Just funny on that is like we did, and again we've used some of the data and some of the numbers and XG. Obviously, like it's part of our game day, our post game review is to look at XG and kind of align that with performance. And when we started and when we're talking about XG, we're trying to define it in the initial meeting, right? Well, this is what it is. And And then you're talking about that there. You're saying, right, well, in this shot here, and you've got players saying, like, what do you think the XG is? And they're like, oh, that'll be a 0.95. And like, it's actually a 0.15. And the coach in you, like the coach in me thinks that's really cool, but you can see with them saying, well, that's just not right because I could score that. And then you can't disagree with them because they're players, so it's interesting.
Oh, massively. I know it shapes like lots of conversations for myself around effort, and when they do miss 2 or 3 chances, do they go missing? Where do they hide? Do they still communicate and things like that? Also, before we sort of come to wrapping up, what's your thoughts again about the drive for perfection and performance, and then how people end up losing that sort of childlike love for the game, don't they? That inner childlike feeling goes away. How do you try and recreate that certainly in a professional environment?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I don't know if you can get it back when it's not there, or if you can instill it when it's not there at 16, 17, 18. And that's just my opinion. Like, I just think that I think, again, like, is the development of people, if you don't have a love of something, and this is something like I have a love of football. Like, I watch, like last night I watched, sat and relaxed on YouTube, watched a movie, and then was like 20 minutes before bed and stuck on the 1995 Copa America just to see, like, I wanted to see, there was a game I was thinking of earlier on that day and I wanted to see if it was on YouTube, but like, I wasn't watching it for any reason other than entertainment. And that's, like, I would say that's not that I work harder than anyone. That's just that I just enjoy the game that much. But a lot of people don't. And I understand actually this generation why they don't, because they don't watch full matches, but they don't have to. Goals are on YouTube and on Instagram, and there's so much other stuff. But I think once you have people that, and you sense that they have a real love of the game, and that love of the game might be like, you might just see them at the airport watching United Chelsea, or that love of the game might be they're sitting talking to you about something, or they just stay an hour after training on by themselves. I think, and certainly as a facilitator on training, I do think that you've got to, that you have a responsibility to, like, it's not a priority, but I do think that training has to be somewhat enjoyable. And that's something that, again, I've caught myself probably where I was in a real tactical growth of the game. I was in a bit of, like, doing a lot of reading, tactical periodization, Friday, all these things. And I was around 2017, it was my last year at college. And tactically, I rebuilt, like, all my training, all the sessions, and it was like layered where even now I look back and think it's like, yeah, and I've changed again, but like I look back and think, yeah, some of that stuff was really, really good. But the balance or the diet of the players weren't getting the other aspect. They weren't getting enough to compete. Some of them enjoy competing, even though I don't like 1v1 stuff. Some of them like that. Some of them like the, like more small-sided. So I think at this level, what I've done is like I've gone up to a player and asked her to design a perfect training session, because she might have a big hold on the team before a game. What would a pre-game training, what would a match day -1 look like if you were to give me your dream session? She then told me it, and then I was like, all right, well, that's what you want, that's what I want, and let's kind of meet. Mm-hmm. And that's where, again, like or a match day minutes, like a extra minute session where you've got the players the morning after a game. So you've got the players that didn't play a lot, and you've got players that didn't play at all. And that's the session where, as a coach, I try to take a step back in terms of, like, I'm not going to, like, coach them today in terms of, I don't think they need Gary telling them what's wrong. I think they need to enjoy the game, because either the emotion of last night kicked them, or the disappointment in not playing kicked them. So, like, I prepared myself mentally as a coach to walk out and be like, I have a responsibility today to make sure everyone. I don't believe in fun. Like, I don't do soccer tennis. I don't do soccer golf. I don't do relay races. I just don't. That's not me. I won't ever, like, I laugh with the coaching staff on it. I won't ever do it. Like, I'll never, ever do it. Someone else can do it and it's fine. It's their personality. But my personality, I do believe in enjoyment. So like the fun is laughing. Enjoyment to me is like, hey, I love us. So for me, enjoyment is what would an enjoyable training session look like on a match day +1. And to me, it's like a little bit of technical, like touches, which kind of go against some of my philosophy, touches without any other decision making, but they enjoy it. A little bit of 1v1 stuff, 6v6. And I know my job is referee, get the times and encourage. And I think that's, again, like it's just my perception. David, you might have 6 players saying, he's an idiot. Like, oh, I can't stand him that day. But like, that's what I try to do. Because I think to your point, like, I think it's so important. I think if you can catch a player when they're down, and even like, who was I listening to yesterday? Someone really good on an interview, and they were saying like there was Ferguson, Bobby Robson, like the genius in them was that when they saw that you were, I think it was Bobby Robson, I think it was like Terry Butcher talking about Bobby Robson, the genius, like when they saw you were down, you just went up and they made you, you know, sometimes as coaches, you're just trying to correct all the time. And he would tell you how good you were and you would just walk away. Oh no, I'll tell you who it was. It was Mark Hateley on the Simon Ferry podcast. And he was talking about what made Bobby Robson great. And he was saying that he would send flowers to his wife when he was dropped, which I thought was so bizarre and genius. And then the other one was that he would drop you and you would walk away feeling 10 feet tall. And I don't think there's any coach that's like mastered that conversation. But yeah, brilliant.
Yes, yeah. Again, as you say, it's all about the individual in that respect, isn't it? And taking the time, humility, or all those sort of words. I love that. So yeah, can you give 3 key takeaways from our conversation to the listeners, possibly for some coaches out there?
Gary talks a lot. Takeaway number 1. Gary waffles. Takeaway 2. Yeah, I think like for me, it would be don't get constrained by frameworks. Like don't like read and educate and do courses, but don't copy and paste things into your environment. Like I think in essence, sometimes we think that coaching is a pathway of steps. Coaching course, first job, win, second job, pro job, head coach, Mourinho. And I think instead it's like find out what you need to take and then find your personality in around that there. And then like talking about the psych, like use your personality alongside the psych to actually impact people. And the advice that I always then give young coaches is start where you are and make the environment better, like build a reputation as someone who's dependable, who says what they're going to do and can actually coach. Like, and I think the coaching is going to come back into vogue where it's going to be less talking and people that can connect. It's going to be a people business again. And I think we're maybe going away from it at the minute. It's just my opinion.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It is. Well, let's face it, it is a people business. Yeah, no doubt about it. Big social thing. So, yeah, Gary, I've really enjoyed this. Whereabouts can the listeners connect with you? Should they want to ask any questions?
Yeah, sure. Twitter, I'm on Twitter. I don't do as much as I used to do, but Gary Curneen on Twitter, Instagram, Gary Curneen. Where else? Email. Like I have a bit of time now. We're in off season, so I'm a bit better with my emails. So it's Gary@modernsoccercoach.com. And yeah, if anyone wants to reach out or any questions at all, feel free.
Brilliant. All those details will go in the show notes. So yeah, much appreciated. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you, David. Enjoyed it.
Me too. Cheers.
Okay, that was good fun, and I hope it gave you a taste into Gary's approach to coaching. 2 things really struck me: his humility in admitting some mistakes that he's made as a coach. Often people are afraid to show their vulnerable side, especially coaches and managers who are in a position of power. However, it's vital to be able to help players, staff, athletes connect with you. The other thing I enjoyed hearing was that he recognised that every player is unique, that they have their own skill sets, their own personalities, own environmental preferences, own values, and so on. It was really refreshing to hear that. And again, something that I'm in agreement with. And as a coach in a team sport, it can be a very difficult role with so many players' demands to meet and the pressures from above your head, the pressures of results. It was great to hear Gary's thoughts on how you as a coach can try and keep that sort of balance. In terms of yourself, and a message from myself here, it's an important one to remember that you're unique too as a coach, that you've got your own strengths, your own achievements, personality traits, values. So please do hold on to those. Please do be aware of those, but also be aware of your limitations. Be careful not to let that positive attitude that you might have towards challenges and the confidence that you've got in your ability mean that you do take on too much. I see this a lot with coaches, often that they do think that they're unbreakable. So do be willing to delegate. Do be willing to trust others, to lighten the load off you if you are in a position to. And as I mentioned at the start of the show, I'm sincerely grateful for you, the listener, and really hope that you go on to have a happy and safe Christmas and enjoy the festivities. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sports psychology resources. The Sport Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.